insert filters into the processing chain. So we kind of went back and forth on how exactly this should work in detail, and eventually ended up with, for the V1 APIs anyway, a webhook mechanism where it would just kind of ship the whole Envoy configuration to a webhook, which could then modify it as it liked and return it back. And that's been working okay for us so far. But now we're moving to the V2 APIs, and I had assumed that we would build some similar mechanism, but with V2 APIs as the as what gets shipped over this mechanism rather than JSON, and that things would be fine. But in talking to people on Slack and talking to people about the direction on Pilot, it seems like there's still some controversy about whether or not we should have a mechanism to allow this kind of extensibility, and whether it should be just a Go interface that you then have to fork Pilot and integrate and then build some plugin, or whether we want to have some sort of API that allows people to do this kind of thing without forking Pilot. So to fork or not to fork, my appeal is let's not ask people to fork Pilot in order to enable this functionality.
And there is the other option that okay, if I can give a bit of background here, since I've been pushing back a bit against this webhook for V2. The main problem with V2 is that the structure of the protocol, it's very, very hard to use. It's not really a JSON that we generate. It's a stream of events, and it has all kind of other semantics, basically. I mean, there is the structs are deconstructed, so it's a proto in a particular format that is not the easiest to manipulate. I have no problem if people believe that normal users will be able to figure out that proto and modify it and return it back to Pilot. It's not very hard to add back the webhook. We just send the proto, we get back a modified proto, and we send that to Envoy.
So are you saying the user will need to modify the proto
to use
that?
Yeah, there'll be a webhook that will take up, instead of JSON, they will get a binary proto. Mm-hmm. And then they return back the modified binary proto, and that's what we send to Envoy. Mm-hmm. That's not really hard.
But they could actually marshal and unmarshal this payload, right? To not having to go with a load. They could,
yes. So they could marshal to JSON, then modify it, marshal back to JSON, and then, but keep in mind performance. I mean, it's not free.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not particularly wed to JSON, right? Like the V1 API was JSON, so it made sense for the webhook to be JSON. The V2 API is proto, so I mean, like you want some sense. Like ideally, this would be you would be able to implement your plugin in whatever language you wanted.
No, I agree.
But proto is fine. It's not doesn't exist for every language, but it exists for basically all languages that people would reasonably expect to be able to do this kind of stuff in.
Now, one point I tried to make in the threads was that if we are going to have all the protos that go back and forth between Pilot and Envoy go to some application, some user-defined application, that's more or less an efficient proxy, basically. So you can put a gRPC proxy in front of Pilot and do exactly the same modifications without any change in Pilot, and it will be more efficient. Because in terms of round trips and all this stuff, so what you are saying about the webhook, where Pilot is making requests to the webhook makes changes the proto and sends back to Pilot, and then Pilot sends to Envoy, the exact same thing can be achieved by putting a gRPC proxy in front of Pilot, sending to Pilot, Pilot does whatever it does, returns the proto, you modify, and you send to Envoy.
Right.
So and that can be done with out of box it's very simple, because you are basically having you are implementing the same proto as a server. As a client, you send to Pilot. and then you do modifications, and you get the result that you want. It's not really, and it's not intrusive on pilot.
So what is the proposal then?
So the proposal is my proposal is if you are willing to deal with the Protos and with Envoy configuration and Protos, the simplest solution today is to just implement in Node.js or whatever language, implement a proxy that implements the ADS interface as a server and as a client.
You just play middleman, right? So envoys talk to you, you call pilot, you forward to pilot. When pilot responds, you make your modifications and then forward back to Envoy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it happens as this is our plan for post 1.0 to do the pilot-to-pilot communication, because we will also have this middle. So pilot itself will be a middleman between the central pilot remember the design for zero VPN and multi-clusters, the original designs that we decided that is too complicated for now. But it will be based on the same assumptions that you have a pilot in a regional cluster talking with a central pilot and doing some sort of caching manipulation and other stuff for the local cluster. So again, I have no problem if we want to go with a webhook, but it's both more complicated, less efficient, and doesn't really have another benefits that I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, so the idea of having some middle proxy that's talking gRPC is sort of fine if you're dealing with the XDS protocol kind of in its or the ADS protocol in its kind of full hairiness. I'm wondering whether it is possible to present something that is slightly friendlier as an integration, something that actually speaks the sort of semantics that Pilot understands about.
Well, and in-memory plugin, like an nproc plugin.
Or something to what Shriram. Actually, I'll let Shriram talk. I think it's online.
What in-memory thing?
No. So Shriram was mentioning about putting all kind of information in the as extension to the API or some CRD where you can put arbitrary filters or whatever you want as basically as deltas or so you would not deal with the Protos.
Filters will be enabled by default, and then that so that means it's you can definitely there's a PR out there which allows you to add dummy filters, just empty filter configuration that we can simply stick into the configuration we generate, which means that all the filters that are specified will be always enabled. And so the filter configuration has to be modified within Envoy to accept an empty filter configuration and then parse the actual information from the virtual host itself. That is how the fault filter is working today, and that's how the mixer filter is also being done today.
Sorry, I didn't really understand that explanation. Can you
look at the route local configuration stuff that went in Envoy? Essentially, it basically says that you can just have a completely empty filter configuration in Envoy, so that you don't have to do any LDS updates, and you can supply per virtual host or per route configuration for each filter.
So you have to specify the set of filters, but you don't have to configure the filters, is what you're saying, and then you push.
And actually add those. Well, yes, and then you add the filter configuration with every route route that you want.
But that doesn't address Spike's concern of wanting to be able to work within the kind of Istio domain, the nicer domain model of Istio as compared to the XDS API, right?
They could just simply add per virtual host metadata to add their specific filter levels information, and that just gets shipped. And another option, a similar option is with some. I mean, what you are saying for Lua, for example, where we have some CRD where you stuff your Lua, and we add it to the filter basically. So we can have some CRDs where you can put your delta, your changes that you want to make. So you want to add the filter typically, or something to the routing rule. If we can stuff it into a CRD, Pilot could read the CRD, and if you have a selector, say I want for this particular report and whatever and pod, I want to add this extra thing. We could add it and implement it in a generic way.
Yep. That's
so
what
will there be one CRD or there be one for each?
One more, that's TBD. I don't know.
So but in theory, there would be a CRD that is generic filter config.
Right.
Yeah, so
And
that's pretty similar to the background document that I listed. The proposal that I originally made was, okay, we're going to have a CRD and it's going to allow you to insert filters and tell Pilot what to put in the configuration for the filter and stuff like that. And we never really got a resolution. We never got to an API that people were satisfied with, and ended up with a sort of web thing.
To be fair, I mean, it's not trivial to have a good API for this.
Well,
because
yeah,
it's
no, exactly.
Selection and
precedence matters as well, actually, for quite a few.
Yeah,
filters,
ordering.
so
There are kind of small details that will get complicated. But I think the Lua filter. I think we definitely want to have a hook for the Lua filter.
Mm-hmm.
And Shriram, I think you have a PR or you are working on one.
There needs to be one more PR that happens, something that change that happens that needs to happen in Envoy before we can actually enable the Lua stuff. But the point with these extensions was that they'll be in perpetual alpha mode, and there's just no need for like API hygiene or like some like nice looking API, because it's effectively breaking out of the Istio's abstraction thing, so you can do whatever you want and like whatever and there is no backward compatibility guarantees or anything of that sort. It's just like, this is just a way by which you can quick and dirty way to extend Istio if you want to. That's
because it's just a break glass, right? Like
So that would be a perfectly acceptable solution if we get the ability to add arbitrary filters, not just Lua filters.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So like Lua is a special carve out. We must have the ability long term to be able to do arbitrary filters. Yeah. Because of your use case, there's a ton of use cases that need it, right? So
whatever we do for Lua applies for this one. So the work that we do for Lua and the patterns that we use for Lua is just an extra step to put arbitrary stuff into Lua.
Right.
The question is when. I mean, that's all.
Okay, so just to draw some conclusion here, since we are all good that this is an acceptable solution, right, where we would have some CRDs holding the list of filters, right? We can start with the Lua, and then Pilot would process those CRDs and insert whatever is needed into the ADS. Is that a good summary?
That's one solution, and I think nobody is objecting necessarily to this.
Yeah, it's just
so that's an okay solution.
Yeah, I think everybody likes that solution. I think that there's still some design things that we need to nail down.
For that though, I mean, remember that like the filter configurations are a struct, so you will still have to write a plugin if you want to have a same way by which people can configure this. Otherwise,
there's other ways you could do that, Sriram. You could have a controller that ingests your own custom CRD that emits the generic Istio CRD, for example.
And the CRD will have a struct inside. I mean,
the filter configuration is a struct, which means within our CRD they have to write the entire.
Is that yours? Oh, it's mine. Sorry, excuse me, please.
No, sure. I see what you're saying. My point is that like that primitive provides a way that you could build a better experience for the user using only that primitive, right? Like, so I could define a custom CRD that's really nice for a user to work with. I implement a little bit of logic to transform it into the generic one.
Yeah.
Well,
that's one approach that we could use.
But long term, short term, putting a struct in a CRD is not rocket science, and is good enough and satisfies the requirements, I think.
Yes.
It's better than work with Protos.
I wanted to ask about the difference between a filter and a filter configuration. So if I have a Lua filter that, say, removes a header, can I then have a filter configuration remove header 1 and another one to remove header 2? The sample it was unclear if I would send the rule down twice or if the rule was already supposed to be loaded. How does that happen?
That depends on the filter, actually.
And we don't know, basically. That's what when we implement it, we'll start to learn more about this. That's why the difficulty of it is that there are kind of small details like this that we don't know yet the answer. And
I was thinking it'd be nice to divide it into a filter and a filter configuration so that you could sort of say I have a filter called remove header and the configuration is this, the configuration is that for 2 instances of it.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, and I will point out that this is all getting pretty close to the territory that Mixer already covers with their adapter model. And, so we should probably draw from how they have structured things, right? They have this concept of an adapter with specific config in this instance, right? Which is a filter with specific config in this case.
Yeah.
There are parallels there that we can draw from.
At the same time, we need to learn from the fact that
Yes.
Mixer is not the easiest way. I mean,
Yes,
we need kind of
improve, simplify.
something simpler, maybe something maybe not so flexible that
Yes.
satisfies the requirements to inject a filter, which is
Yes.
seems to be the main requirement,
Yes.
and they want to inject a Lua stuff.
Yep.
And then we can,
and also clusters.
in the both clusters and to inject additional clusters.
No,
Yeah.
you can't add additional.
Well, you can do that today already with an external service.
Yeah, that's the only way to add clusters.
Yeah.
That would be fine if I can point
Specify unit.
to a UDS endpoint.
You want UDS endpoint?
Yes, because like what I want to do is have a filter that talks to another sidecar, not talks to some generic like.
Well, but that's
available.
Sure, but that's config that you push to your filter, right? Like your filter implementation should use UDS in Envoy.
Yeah, exactly. But I still need to create the cluster.
No, for the cluster that speaks UDS.
Oh, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
I think that's. I'm very happy to have this feature anytime you want. I mean, to have UDS.
You can support the service entry already, right? So it's like we right now have take an address in the IP form, but we can always take an address in the Unix domain form.
So
I is a little bit more generic in the sense that you can override an existing services, the way to talk to the service by specifying Unix domain socket if you want to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
so I think we are okay with extending the external service paradigm to.
It's not external service anymore. It's a little bit more generic one that allows you to decorate internal services as well as add more services. So that's there is that PR has already went in. So it's called service registry entries or something, and
service entry.
Yeah, service entry.
which allows you to like add more information for any given service, whether you need to talk to the service using Unix domain socket or IPv4, IPv6, and so on and so forth. And so that's typically in the plan. I think we could get down to that in 0.8.1 or 2 or 3 or something of that sort. So it should not be much of an issue.
Yeah, the UDS definitely not. And
We can
so sorry for background for people who are not following PRs very closely.
This is
The former, what we used to call external service is now called service entry. And the reason for that, Shriram had a very good point that we are not using it only for external, using it for mesh expansion. We are using it for this kind of stuff that you just described. It's just a general way to add services that are not part of the Kubernetes, basically.
Yeah.
Arbitrary
Like Pilot itself is a service registry, and this is how you populate entries in Pilot's registry.
Yep.
And so you can use this API in order to add internal services that are not part of the system, as well as wherever they're running, and use this to add additional decorators like Unix domain sockets and so on and so forth. So, but the bottom line is this is the cleanest way to add clusters to the system, because every cluster corresponds to a service in the system, and
that sounds great.
So is there any way now to distinguish between an external service to the mesh?
I don't think we ever wanted that. In my opinion, it was a bad smell that we ever had any code that dealt with internal or external. We talk to endpoints.
Yes.
You tell us how to talk to endpoints, and we shouldn't need anything more than that, in my opinion.
The auth stuff, right? We need to know whether auth should be enabled or not for those services.
Well, but auth policy does that, right?
Yeah, I mean,
that's the thing. But yes, they should do it, but they don't do it today. The other same thing applies to Mixer as well, which was treating the external services in a very funny way.
Yeah.
Stuff that Manda was thinking. So that also. But there is a way today as a stopgap measure to allow you to specify whether the service is external or internal to the mesh. It's like an enum option that you can actually add to specify that this is a service that's internal to the mesh.
Yeah.
Right, and even if it's just for informational purposes, it would be good, right? For somebody to understand if like that particular thing they're calling, it's actually going out of their, security trusted zone and everything of their mesh.
And there is yet another way, which is to put a label.
Yes.
And then you can classify external by whatever you want. You can say external, but trusted, external, but not trusted, external crap here with bad
Right.
far away.
We'll see if we'll have some use case that will actually require a clear distinction.
Well, there is, but that's what the
cases.
egress proxy is for. That's why egress gateways exist, right? So that's how you should model things that live outside. But we should not make decisions about whether we use MTLS or not, or that kind of thing based on a bit that says internal or external.
Yeah.
Like that shouldn't be what we trust.
It's too broad. I mean, internal external is not detailed enough. I mean, gateways and explicit policies are far more flexible.
Yeah, gateways are for bridging trust domains, which is really the heart of what you're getting at, right? The external services, really the thing that we care about for external services is that we have they live in a different trust domain than our mesh. And gateways are the tool that we built for bridging trust domains.
It's not necessarily different trust domains because you're going to use a gateway to connect to another cluster, right?
That's what mesh, but it is the same trust domain because they have the same concept of the same root of trust.
Right. So that's what I said. You may still use your gateway to connect to another cluster which is in the same trust domain.
Yes.
Right. So it's.
But you'll also.
So both are. I mean, there are many use cases, many ways to. So yeah, I think we are.
I think we have to keep on, an eye on this, right?
Yes.
Zero VPN, which is our favorite feature. Yeah.
Well, I love. Yeah. I mean, I'm right there with you.
Hi, can I ask a question about the service entries thing? This is a little new to me. I'm curious if that obsoletes the need for platform-specific service registries.
No. That is still needed. I mean, you can always add 1 million service entries, but that's just not going to scale. So if a platform registry is essentially a fast path, if you will, a fast path by directly add entries into the pilot service model. A service entry is an explicit way by which you can add more entries into the service model.
So we see the difference between them as a performance thing, not as a feature set thing?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the service entry, it's almost synced with the service model that we have. It's basically exact same set of fields. So it's just another way by which you can add entries, that's all. Yeah, it's performance.
So just a thing that to which you can add endpoints manually or?
Yeah, basically.
Like.
Is it possible in the service entry model to specify the properties of that endpoint? Like, for example, it's HTTP to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I want to be clear. That's not a property of service entry. That is a property of destination rules. You can do that for any service.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, but also you can support names and
Yes.
And labels. You can put labels. That also solves the problem of mesh expansion with labels and a lot of other things. Yes.
Yeah.
How do the explicit service entries impose like a penalty, a performance penalty? How's that?
Scalability.
Why?
Scalability.
Yeah, it's just manageability. That's all. If you have like 500, you're gonna have 500 configuration files, or you can just read it dynamically from this thing. And so every time a thing changes, every time an endpoint changes, an endpoint's IP changes, you have to go and edit that configuration file and then update it, which takes longer time to. Whereas as a platform registry, which is directly watching and updating into pilot, it's instantaneous or near instantaneous in some sense.
Well, this is also instantaneous technically.
It's just way more overhead.
It's not designed to be a database of large number of entries. I mean, if you have 100, it's probably too much.
Yeah, it really. The intended use case is external services and mesh expansion, right? Those are the two, and arguably.
And the UDPs that we just discovered.
Mesh expansion would still have a large number of endpoints,
right? It will, and I was going to say, arguably, you don't even want to mesh expansion. You'd like to represent a little bit
mesh expansion. It's if you have more than few hundred machines in the mesh expansion, probably you are better off if you use Consul or some or Kubernetes or some other real registry. I mean, real database.
Yeah.
If you have 10, 20 machines, yes, you can use this mechanism, but you don't want to manually go and edit and.
If you already have.
Well,
if you already have a deployment of hundreds or thousands of VMs, you have some existing service discovery solution.
Zookeeper or something. Yes.
Right. So Zookeeper, Console, something like that.
Right. So this is, in a way, this service entry doesn't seem to be used to mirror the endpoints that are in a remote cluster.
No, definitely not.
That's not the intent.
That's not the intent. Well,
it can be used to do that.
So let me step back a bit. One possible option is to use the service entry as an interface to replace the internal models that we use today.
Yeah. That would be wonderful. Yeah.
That's why I was asking.
No, they're the same actually. I mean, the service entry and internal model are the same. I mean, it's just the same, right? So
Yeah, we
So
can make
guys,
it exactly
we
the same.
need a service that is able to model things that exist on the local cluster and on the remote cluster. And that doesn't need to be like Service Center. It doesn't need to have any external thing attached to it because the endpoints will be in both clusters, right?
Yeah,
so we need the service to be able to do that. I don't see why
possible.
we need to invent a thing called service entry to model the remote endpoints.
We already did that.
Yeah, we need it. We don't need it to model remote endpoints in that sense. We need it to model things that are not part of the mesh. That was the original use case,
so that's
right?
the external things,
Yes.
right? Which are not part of the mesh. But what I hear, you just told me that now the external service has been renamed to service entry just because it's actually a holding or it holds
Mesh expansion. Yes.
for mesh expansion for things that are in the mesh.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So with this, I have a problem.
Why?
Because we need we kind of lost. We conflated the external from the internal things.
Yes.
And we are kind of having a separate entity to model things that are in a different cluster, and they should all be together, in fact.
So
it's not necessarily conflating. They were already kind of conflated. I mean, this is a way to define endpoints basically and labels associated with them.
Right. So then, if we never needed the external endpoints, I don't know why they were invented.
Well, for mesh expansion, for example,
right?
doesn't have a way to represent labels. I mean, with what we used in the first version of mesh expansion, we couldn't put labels and we couldn't combine services and do a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
So that was absolutely needed to have some entry, and service entry is the answer to that. At the same time, some people needed to represent things that are external. And they have exactly the same properties, the same fields, the same label, exactly same content. Should we have two different names?
I don't think so. I think the service should be able to have a label-based endpoints plus remote endpoints that are not necessarily selected by label, right? But I don't think we should have a service entry for this. I think we should just No, right now our definition maps to Kubernetes. It maps to select by label.
Yeah, but the Kubernetes doesn't for labels on endpoints. That's missing.
Yeah, so we had, like we discussed for the environment, that this is going into the hybrid discussions we had, right? Like, so we are like, we discussed there about having services, right? With different types of endpoints. And now we're kind of, instead of having different types of endpoints, we suddenly have different type of services. We have a regular service, which select based on labels. And we have a service entry,
which also selects by label.
We select by label, but also admits foreign entries.
Yes.
I mean,
okay, so then we need only one. We don't need two things.
Well, we don't have two. We only have service entry.
I kind of like that explicit service entry because you could actually implement kind of a platform adapter without having to be in tree and compile with pilot, because you can do that from external, right? Exactly. I'm not talking about the user managing thousands of YAML files defining these, but rather some automatism that generates these entries. And I really like the idea.
Yes.
That's why I asked about the performance problems.
So why is this not the service again?
It is a service. So we could call it just service, but Kubernetes took that name.
No, Andrea was asking why it's not Kubernetes service. And Kubernetes service.
No, I'm not asking this. I think this should be the service, right? And the service is populated.
You mean Kubernetes service?
No, in Istio, so we need an abstraction of a service. Yeah. We need an API to insert services, insert endpoints, right?
Yes.
This can be.
Yes.
So why didn't we reuse this service?
Which one?
Why
because the name service is contentious.
Is the short implementation or
okay, so this service entry, it's actually this service.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I would have basically used the service that we already have and extend it to this. But
we don't already have a service. That's the whole thing.
We do.
We have a proto employee struct.
We have a struct and pilot named service, but that's not an API that users can interact with. We don't have a formal model of a service in pilot until now, which we just added.
Well, we had it before.
But that should be called service, not like service entry.
We discussed it.
I think it's very. When did you discuss it, guys? This kind of discussion
on the
Slack, on the PR. Okay, this kind of discussion should really be like, you know.
We talked about it, right? Like Shreyab and I talked about it too, in Hangouts and all. And the short answer, and we talked about when we named virtual service as well. we threw around a bunch of different names. We've been over, like, service is just a really overloaded name, is the short answer for why it's not named service.
I think everyone who expressed an opinion about naming the PR or outside had a different idea. So I think how many people, how many names we ended up. My favorite was destination.
No, but if it's a service, I mean, you should just call it service, not service entry.
I know.
I mean, why would you have multiple entries in a service?
Yeah.
I mean, what's
you
the
could
implication?
No, the reason was Kubernetes using the name service for something that is almost identical, but not exactly the same. And we were worried that people will be concerned, will be confused by the use of name service.
I think we used to have also service instance, which is, to me, makes more sense than
also only in pilot though. That's not a that's not an API, that's only in pilot.
That's okay, we can make it a proto. So like service entry, it's really misleading.
Okay, Louis and Sriram agreed on one name, and
I
defer to them.
Messenger for the names. I mean,
It's like
quote everybody for the names, and the service entry was the majority. So I just picked that one.
Yeah.
And isn't even service entry actually like the combination of service and the
sorry,
like,
and could you repeat? You're breaking up badly. Or maybe turn off the video. You're breaking up badly.
Yeah,
maybe
maybe
turn
I
off
should.
the video and retry, please.
We'll remember your feedback.
Is it better?
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't actually the service entry like a mix of service and service instance, because it also has endpoint data and stuff like that? So maybe that's even not like just a service, but anyway.
We can spend 5 hours discussing names.
We should.
already spend them.
Yeah, can I just put a sharp point on the original discussion with what I think we have agreed. One, we are if service entry doesn't already support Unix domain sockets, we'll work to get that in. And then number two, the mechanism that we've started around Lua scripting is going to be expanded to allow the insertion of arbitrary filters and filter config without any pilot code changes for the person who wants to add a new filter.
Yep, I think that's agreement.
All right, cool.
Except we didn't agree on timeline. I mean, 08, we may or may not have either of them. I mean, 080.
Well, like, yeah, if y'all want to go implement it,
Doesn't
then
080
you can have it as fast
already
as you
like
do it.
cut?
No,
It is delayed.
Okay.
A release candidate was cut. That
Two
won't
release
be the
candidates have
final.
been cut.
Okay.
It's
But-
branched, but it's not.
It's branched, but we still have at least one breaking. I mean, the security team wanted to have the transparent SSL, and VoIP PR was delayed a bit, and we decided to wait and so to make them happy, because security working group believes it's a critical feature for them to get things right.
That's well.
Well, you know, we care about this, so we can.
And we have a number of bugs. Okay, Laurent is right. We also have a number of bugs.
Blame security for
Yeah.
days. Funny.
Well,
There are a variety
no.
of issues across the project.
That is one thing that we are blocking. For pilot, we can document things that are not yet working, and Mixer is not working as well. It's there are things that are.
Well, I mean, I'm not looking for a commitment that this is going to make it in 0.8, so that's fine.
Okay, then it's good.
But there's I just to make sure that it is reasonable to help this get through into 1.0, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But
definitely.
who's going to work on this then?
That's a good question.
I mean, we're kind of making commitments about
Well, we're not making
timelines,
commission.
but it's not clear
No.
who's signing up for this, in fact.
If they want the Unix domain socket stuff, I mean, so Spike said they are willing to put in the resources for that, right? So for us, for our requirements, whatever we have is sufficient. So Saurabh and Spike, they will probably add the support for Unix domain socket and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So we're willing to work on this stuff. So like I'm mostly in this meeting looking for just a decision that if we build it this way, then barring the usual kind of caveats, we'll be able to get the PRs in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but you make sure to also change the aux filter with an envoy to accept an empty configuration and take the configuration from per route level stuff. Otherwise, you might have difficulty.
Okay. Well, so that might not work for TCP, right? Because there routes for.
Yeah, well, and Shreeram, we haven't implemented RDS either, so you can't, like, it has to be set in the listener anyway today.
We can change that. That's not a big problem.
Well, I'm just saying, like, if you're hoping for 0.8 or one of the 0.8 sub-releases, we're not using RDS.
We do have RDS implemented, actually. That's not, it's just not enabled by default because we verify the impact on 503.
Sure.
So depending on that. Yes, and UDS is something that we also kind of want for other purposes. I mean, we are also interested. It's just not, we didn't prioritize it because we have other priorities.
Okay, so anything else on this topic?
Jan just asked a question in the doc about the scalability issues around service entry, and I'm curious to hear the answer to that question as well.
Okay. Yeah, actually, so yeah, exactly. So the question is service entry, somebody wrote it. Service entry has same feature set as platform adapter, but will be less performant and scalable. So what exactly is the performance penalty?
Don't think it's I mean, it is as performant as Kubernetes CRD would allow you to. So if Kubernetes CRD can actually hold like 1 million service entries, then that's it. I mean, so it's effectively depends on the eventual consistency model, right? It's just like
So like the real thing that we're doing.
Let me put
is this implemented as a CRD?
It's a CRD.
Yes, it is a CRD. So yeah, you're limited by etcd.
CRD
in Kubernetes.
Yeah, if you have 1 million endpoints, that means that you need to put 1 million endpoints in etcd in the Kubernetes cluster. With platform registry, you can have 10 clusters, each cluster with 100,000 endpoints, and Pilot can get the endpoints from each of them and aggregate them using the platform adapter with the registry adapter. So from this point of view, when you get to 1 million endpoints, it would scale better to have 10 endpoints each with 100,000 than to stuff all 1 million in service entries in one cluster.
There are other concerns too that you might want a platform adapter for, like multi-tenancy or being able to provide different views, right? Which a service entry doesn't address as well.
But could address. I mean,
it would be very challenging to make service entry address that. But yeah, performance-wise, you're making etcd your service registry, and Pilot has to hold that in memory too at some level.
I should point out that technically you can have the service entry replicated in each data center, and then it will behave the same. So technically you could have standard service entry, and have the platform adapters just convert from whatever is the internal representation of service entry and present them. So it technically is not something with service entry; it's with the current implementation mostly.
Yeah.
So if I understand this right, you're imagining that etcd is being used for consistent data, and that the service discovery information you'd rather be available, and so it's sort of a different expectation on the type of data that you're storing. And is that right?
Yes, and how frequently it changes as well, probably.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I see Spike, you said here that Tajura will work on adding UDS support. So all the other things like the CRD with the Lua and the filters, is that already implemented?
No. No. Yeah, the PR is out, but it's not done yet. So it's backlog.
Okay, but who's working then on that? Or
I have one PR out there, but I've not started on the implementation stuff yet.
Okay.
So volunteers. So
that's going to be
someone will volunteer, or it will not be in 1.0. That's kind of the easy answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. So I think we could probably wrap up with this particular topic and move to the next, which is Gabe. You asked a question about original destination for ports, but not IPs.
Yeah. So let me put some context on this. I was talking with some of the Cloud Foundry product people, and due to some limitations that we might want to address on our side, they had questions about whether the Istio data model might be extended to have services that didn't explicitly define ports on them, and whether we could imagine having a service which had an IP, maybe a VIP, but and would have a cluster that it forwards to, but that the port would be whatever original destination the client used. And I just wanted to do a temperature check and see if that made any sense, and if people could see use cases for that or problems with it.
Coming in with what do you mean the original destination, the client, all these. That is effectively what the original destination cluster is for, right?
No, but it's on a port.
Yeah, my understanding is the original destination cluster goes to both the original destination IP and the original destination port. And I'm talking about having a VIP for the IP, but having the port be whatever the client asked for originally.
Yeah, which would be use case would be real-time communication, and actually we did discuss this for a bit for other purposes. The problem today is that Envoy doesn't have this concept of listen on star port. If someone would modify Envoy to listen on star port, I don't see a problem. I think it's super useful.
Mm-hmm. No, but it's not just that. I think the original destination port, I mean, whatever they want, it requires something like, I mean, today the original destination cluster is like the IP and the port are treated as one pair. And even within our own APIs, we have a use case where we want to do things like from star.80 route to star.8080. But what Gabe is asking is like, from like 1.1.1.star route to 2.2.2.star. So the code in Envoy, that feature in Envoy just needs to be a little bit more finer grained, since that you could like rewrite either the IP or the port part of the destination thing and continue the routing part. And this is, you need to start with Envoy first in order to get it.
No, I agree. I mean, the missing part in Envoy is having ability to express a listener on an IP with star port. Right now, they can do on star IP with a port, but you cannot do the other way around.
Right. Okay. So my read of this is that there's some missing features in Envoy, but if we wanted to get those into Envoy somehow, that the community might be willing to accept this as a feature. Is that right?
Yeah, the APIs for V2 already support like ranges of ports, I think. It's just a question of implementation.
Yeah, that's the big thing, my stuff.
Yeah, and it's not only ranges of ports, it's also kind of, if you put all, 0 to 65,000, you also need to make sure that other more explicit listeners take priority, and it's rocket science. I don't think it's super difficult, but it requires some work on Envoy and some testing, and on our side, I think I'm happy to have it in pilot. But
yeah, great, thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
We can go back to discussing names. I'm sure we can fill that 45 minutes.
Okay, so nothing burning. Perfect. We get approximately 15 minutes back from our time, or 2 hour time. Thank you very much, and see you in 2 weeks.
Make 08 great.
Bye.
Yeah, don't forget to test 08, please.
Yeah, please.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Or maybe stop recording. Otherwise, I'm gonna